Greetings, everyone. Miles here from the island of Bali for another episode of the Wisdom Keeper podcast. I've been under a ton of material, getting return with the elixir, moving forward through the publishing chains. The subtitle of the book, Four Maps for the Soul's Journey Through Death and Rebirth, include Campbell, Jung, Tibetan Buddhism, and the Great Year. And it is in that vein that I have today's guest, Walter Cruttenden, who is coming to us today from Newport Beach, California. He is the director of the Binary Research Institute and author of Lost Star of Myth and Time, which has to do with the Great Year. And he's a writer-producer for the award-winning documentary film, The Great Year, featuring none other than the narration by none other than James Earl Jones, which was a spectacular watch, as well as author of numerous articles and papers on the solar system motion and cycles of time, which is the theme of our discussion today. He's enjoyed a successful career as a finance service innovator and investor, and has been a CEO in leading investment banking firms, which I really do think that's a very interesting point that I'd like to get into. Each year, the Binary Research Institute hosts CPAC, the Conference on Precession and Ancient Knowledge, featuring some of the world's foremost experts in the field. Today, thank you so much, Walter, for joining me. I know you have a busy schedule. Your CPAC conference is coming up. You're reading multiple books at the same time. and we are trying to understand the solar system that we live in and its implications to daily life at such a tumultuous sea change. So thank you for joining me, and I hope we get into some portals of mutual interest today.
Yes, pleasure to be on the show here with you, Miles. And I'm absolutely loving your book so far. I'm just partway through, but it's amazing. It's really gripping, actually.
Oh, that's very kind of you. So usually I start the podcast with a little quote just to get us warmed up. I hope you don't mind. The quote is simple, but I think it can open up our discussion a little bit. Sometimes we have to move backwards in order to move forwards. Your thoughts on that, Walter?
You know, my discipline outside of all the fun I have with metaphysical projects is the stock market. And I'm reminded every day that we move down before we move up. And, you know, most of the time, the long-term trajectory is up, but there's some scary moments along the way. And that just seems to be part of life, doesn't it?
Well, that's an amazing. See, I've had several guests, and no one's ever mentioned the stock market. So this is, I thought it was interesting in your bio, given your finance background, and I'm so curious how that segues, most especially because you're in the spiritual world, and sometimes, you know, finance, money, investment banking can get a bad rap, but I see it as a real non-duality. So, I mean, just by way of background, can you tell us a little bit about your finance background?
Sure. My father and grandfather were in that business, financing companies, did the original financing for Revlon, Culligan, Train Air Conditioning, and, you know, lots and lots of companies. And so I kind of grew up in learning about how you take companies public, how you finance them, and that sort of thing. And so just naturally went into it, and it enabled me to make a good living. And once you make a good living, then you can do the things you really enjoy, which is get into the whole, astronomical world and world of history, which is what I love.
It seems so obvious, but I'm sure you've encountered a lot of this sort of binary, to use the word, but sort of dualistic thinking where, you know, money and finance has a bad rap. But it really, I mean, look, it's about the heart and what you're able to do with it. I mean, surely you've been able to put it to use so that your research interests really are allowed to be deepened. So, I mean, another question, just if you don't mind, your father and yourself, did you go through bust and boom cycles, and what's it like? Did you ever go bankrupt, and did you ever encounter real economic hardship along the way?
Never went bankrupt, but had companies go bankrupt, and it's always a trying time, you know, because when people entrust their money to you, your number one obligation, not just financially, but morally, ethically, is to get them their money back and a good return. And so it's always hard. And this is a lesson in diversity. Don't just invest in one deal, invest in 10 or more companies. So you have a high correlation with the market's long-term performance, which long-term it usually always goes up.
I'm digging there because, though we don't like to quote unquote lose or fail, um, someone of your experience, I'm sure, probably learned a great deal from some of the companies not making it, and that sort of gives you your sea legs for making better choices in the future. I think it's a theme that we'll probably get into with the great year.
Yes,
You
it
can't you
builds
can't
discrimination for sure. I have a teacher, Paramahansa Yogananda, and he said that being successful in business is second only to finding God, because you have to be so darn practical to be successful in business. It does shape your decision making capability. So I think the two go hand in hand.
Yeah, I think it's this attitude that, what creates resilience, what gives you experience, is sometimes going through the dark night. And I'd like to just pin that for probably later in the conversation when we get to the great year, because there's something about what happens when things are not going well, the sea change, the tumult, the chaos, losing yourself, whether it be individually or collectively, that actually somehow is necessary for the moments when the transition happens and we head towards ascension. So I just thought it was curious in your bio that I love that. I love that that's part of your toolkit and your matrix of your being. I wonder if there's any other sort of stellar events in your childhood that you would look back and reminisce on that were really central or pivotal into the formation of your key interests now in what you're doing.
Mm. You know, I've always seemed to have a lot of mystical experiences. I just assume everybody does, and you don't talk about them too much. Um, but you know, I've been meditating a long time, almost 60 years, and the more aware you become of the larger world, the more you don't just sort those cool experiences way over there. They're part of your life. And so, yeah, I suppose as I get older, then I realize these things that happened in my life, being shot with a spear gun, for example, when I'm a kid or something. Uh, you you tend to bring that in as it's not bad. It's just part of what helps you grow, helps you make better decisions. It was my fault I was shot by that spear gun because I got too close to the skin divers when I was on a wave. And so for me, uh, yeah, the older I get, hopefully I gain a little wisdom along the way and I'm able to just bring these things in a little bit more. And there are just like all steps along the way. I've never talked with a psychologist like this on a podcast. So I love your perspective you bring to this conversation.
Just get ready. I'll probably annoy you by the end of this conversation. I mean, I'm all humility aside. I mean, if you talk about Kundalini or you talk about spiritual experiences, let's say that, that I'm going to be prying, and, we do not normally talk about it. So we kind of get the sense that it's too grandiose if you start talking about your spiritual experiences. But if I were to pry and ask you for one, I'm just curious, like, what was it? If you don't mind, I just think it reveals so much about a person. A spiritual experience that you can remember?
Yeah, I mean, gee,
An
I,
early one?
I too prefer not to talk about these, but just seeing a blue light, you
Mm.
know, constantly, every other few days or something like that, and realizing that that's like a friendly helping presence
Mm.
is an experience. It's just something simple and just just fleeting and yet very comforting.
Did the blue light experience happen when you were younger, like a kid?
Yeah, I think started as from earliest memories, like 7 years old or something like that. It was always my favorite color. That's probably why I picked it. But yeah, it's just, and then, to this day, it's cool.
Were you ever afraid?
I've been afraid of many things throughout the years.
But
Uh,
of these sort of paranormal experiences, did they ever catch you off guard, or did you have to warm up to them?
no, I can't say I've ever had any frightening experiences.
Hmm.
I think the way the great ones work, I don't know how, I haven't read all your books, so I don't know the deepness of your beliefs in these sorts of things, but I think, we have physical friends here. There's probably universes of things going on that we don't see and we're not aware of. But I think that for the most part, there's very beneficent forces, higher beings, and they're not interested in scaring us. They're interested in helping us. That's how I feel.
Yeah,
But
certainly. I come from the Tibetan perspective, and just like Indic cosmology, we're surrounded by entities of all kinds of dimensions, and not all the entities are favorable. Here in Bali, for example, the Balinese are very, uh, they spend a lot of time propitiating the deities, making sure that there's order and making sure everybody's happy. So it's a big part of their daily routine to set out offerings so that some of the more chaotic agencies are well fed, so that they don't intervene in malicious ways. And but I'm starting to talk more about this now with people, students and colleagues. We're at a particular time where, beseeching as many entities and as much good energy as we can around us, even the unseen world, is really critical right now, because we have to marshal as much wisdom as we possibly can and support. So um, these are things that maybe a few years ago we didn't talk about, and now I think the time is right to start talking about them. Can I ask, Walter, how you came across the work of Paramahansa, and would have that been your first inroads into mystical traditions?
yes, yeah, I think I was 12 years old and we were just driving by the ashram on Coast Highway, Swami's famous place in Southern California, Encinitas, with my dad. And uh, I just said, "What's that?" I wanted to know everything about it and everything about this guy that started it. And yeah, and then so I just started reading more about that from a young age, and that was kind of the discipline I fell into. I had gone to church, when I was a kid. My parents would drop me off there. They really didn't want to go that much, but um, getting a deeper spiritual discipline that involves some yoga and meditation and stuff was just more fulfilling than the typical Western Sunday school.
I'm struck by that, because in my mind I'm thinking, well, yeah, that's can only really be explained by past life karmic connection. I mean, in the Buddhist world, we would say there's a lot of past karma that connects a young boy of 12 to have that kind of experience, where most are interested in, I don't know what, sports or whatever. You're driving around the world and a karmic seed pops and your heart just gets pulled, and before you know it, you're studying meditation, and even before that, you're having quasi or full on mystical experiences, seeing
Uh,
entities or connecting with other
oh, I was
agencies.
interested in sports too, and all the kid stuff. I'm just a normal kid, and this other stuff, it's just in the background. You don't, I think everyone has it, whether or not they talk about it very much. I don't know. You know
It,
more than me.
it may be true, but there's also something that you were gripped by, and so you pursued it. I mean, I think you went for it. It's certainly 12 is an interesting age. I think if that made a deep impression on you, I can only imagine that that has some past life connection, whatever, for whatever that means. That was my initial thought. Oh, like this is something. I mean, I myself, I went to India when I was 18. You know, I have a lot of students now that said, "Oh, I wish I started that early." Um, what prompted you? Well, you know, sometimes these things are unexplainable. They're by a rational paradigm. It doesn't really make sense why an 18-year-old or 19-year-old would find themselves 5 months at the site of the Buddha's enlightenment in India. But it makes a lot of sense now at almost 50. So, Walter, I mean, you know, part of the conversation today is really to understand the great year, and within the great year, the nested concept or notion of a binary star system. And really, you know, I've read some of the work that you're doing, which is incredible, and it's technical, and I'd love for you to give a sort of layman's review of it with an eye of our conversation going through the technicality, and in order to get to the application, like why does this matter? Why does it matter now? Um, and how do you see things playing out in the world according to this lens that you've been cultivating for decades? So I don't know where you want to start, but I will reference the article on Graham Hancock's site because I think it's pithy and very approachable. Um, you know, where would you like to start in terms of outlining the great year?
Sure, I can give a very brief, non-technical overview.
That would be great.
And then we'll just look at history and Copernicus a little bit, because that seems to be where a lot of things start.
Wonderful.
Um, so, you know, you're familiar with Graham Hancock and this idea that ancient cultures all around the world spoke of this vast cycle of time with alternating dark and golden ages, something that Plato called the Great Year. And of course, modern scholars accept the idea of a dark age, you know, that history kind of declined, a lot of great civilization, ancient Greece, Egypt, Rome, etc. And we wallowed in this dark age period for 1,000 years or so. And then we had a renaissance, and things are going up since then, pretty bumpy. But you can tell by the technology that seems to be getting clever. At least we have the ability to create more complex things. So consciousness is expanding, you would say. But scholars consider the idea of the other half of that equation, a long lost golden age, to be pure myth. Mm-hmm. It's a widespread myth, very prevalent. But they, you know, if a great year is one precession of the equinox, and we just went through the dark age, you know, just right before the Renaissance, then, you know, the last peak is something like, you know, 10, 12,000 years ago. So it's kind of lost to history, as well as, according to Hesiod, the great Greek historian, you know, he would say that the golden age was a time when mankind lived in tune with nature. She gave of herself freely. Mankind lived to be very old age, you know, and we find this in the Bible with Seth, Methuselah, Noah, you know, 700-800 years old, stuff like this. But it's also in the Egyptian kings list, the Chinese dynastic records, all this talk about people living long ages, long ago, very close to nature. Telepathy and clairvoyance was common knowledge, you know, before it was lost sort of in the age of Babel. So to me, it just makes sense that, you know, either these great masters that talk about this stuff are full of baloney and I can't believe them on anything, or they must be right about this also, at least in bulk, you know, because things do get twisted over the years a little bit. And so I wanted to know if there was indeed such a cycle, a higher age, and what causes it. And so I understand why modern scholars, academics don't believe in it, because they don't see any apparent
Yes.
cause. What would cause such a cycle of, 12,000 years up, 12,000 years down, that sort of thing. And to understand a good analogy of this, we look at the three motions of the Earth as given to us by Copernicus. What Copernicus wanted to do was bring back the old heliocentric system that existed under the Greeks and was lost during the Dark Ages. And so we had this Ptolemaic system of a geocentric system, existing for all through the Dark Ages. And but Copernicus, he's living in early 1500s. People are just starting to wake up. The great clockmaking era in Europe has happened, and people are getting more clever. And so to put the sun fixed at the center of the universe, what he believed that all the stars were fixed, he needed to account for the sun's motions. And the first motion that everyone saw was, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. It goes around us every day. And so do all the stars and the moon and the planets, and everything rises in the east and sets in the west. And of course, he explained that, it would just be way too much to expect all these things to be moving at these huge speeds. They were starting to realize distances then, for that all to go around us every day. And what's really happening is the Earth is spinning on its axis, just as the Greeks had said. And so that was his first motion that he sort of resurrected. The Earth rotates on its axis. And a lot of people didn't believe him. They fought him. Are you kidding? We'd feel it moving. We don't feel it moving. How could we be rotating? But of course, in time, it was accepted. And then his second motion, what he had to explain, why does the sun rise in a different constellation throughout the year in the order of the calendar? The end of January, what is it? Pisces, or Aquarius, and then Pisces in February, and then Aries and Taurus, etc. Why does the sun seem to move that way? And he explained, at the same time the Earth spinning on its axis, it's also going around the sun. And so we're seeing a different 30 degrees background of sky where the sun rises or sets. And so he explained that one. So he's just about completely fixed the sun from any motion. So it could be the peg, the center of the universe. But he had a final thing to explain, and that was why, if you only look on the equinox, does the sun actually move backwards 50 arc seconds per year? So that after roughly 24,000, 26,000 years at the current rate, the sun would appear to go completely around us, backwards through all the signs of the zodiac, which are just a reference frame out there. And so this one, he wasn't quite sure. And he said, the axis must wobble. And because it wobbles, we probably have the equinox happen at a different place in the Earth's orbit around the sun. And so on the equinox, we're actually seeing a different portion of sky. And that would mean that the Earth doesn't go around the sun exactly 360 degrees. It comes up 50 arc seconds short in the Copernican system. And that's why you'd see precession. The stars move all around us every 24,000 years. But he didn't say why. And Newton said, well, if the axis wobbles, it's got to be due to the gravity of the sun and the moon acting on the oblate Earth. And, we know the sun and the moon seem to correlate with the tides. So it's got to be these two big, huge masses. And so he wrote an equation for that. And, 50 or 100 years go by and people realize, well, it doesn't really work very well. And so Jean-Laurent d'Alembert, Urbain Le Verrier, all these people correct it and start adding things in. It's not just the sun and the moon, it's also Jupiter and Venus and Mars. And you get into dozens of objects, and then it's still not working. You're up to hundreds of objects, still not working. You're up to thousands of objects. every asteroid and comet must have an effect, right? And so by the time of Simon Newcomb, precession calculations were still important because you needed to know where the sun was if you're navigating, across 3,000 miles of sea. If you're going from Australia to Japan or to San Francisco or something, or trying to hit a little island along the way, you better be darn sure where the sun is. And so people really struggled with how the sun was moving. And Newcomb just said, I don't know, but if you look at these last few hundred years, just add in 0.000222 arc seconds per year, and you'll
Bingo.
have this all figured out, right? The only problem with that, he didn't say why that happens. Why is the sun accelerating? He just said, I don't know why, but mathematically add this in, it'll work. And so to this day, there's like 3,000 inputs in the calculation. Nobody cares about precession anymore. We use radios, radar,
GPS.
GPS, exactly. Satellites, the last thing anybody does is a precession calculation. And so people just think it doesn't matter. But it matters to me because Yogananda's master, this Swami Sri Yukteswar, wrote this little book and said, that moons take planets and they go around their planets, and planets with their moon take a star, a sun, and goes around it. And then planets with their moon and their sun, this whole solar system, finds another star for its companion and goes around it. And that causes the backward motion of the equinoctial point.
Mm.
And so he gives a completely different reason for precession, saying basically very little to do with a wobbling axis. And so when I read that, I thought, man, oh man, who could be right about this? And I knew there was a whole body of work on precession, but when I dug into it, I realized they never actually figured it all out. It's always been messy. And then so we build a model based on just this.
Before we go any further with the binary system,
Yeah.
I just want to, I'm sorry to interrupt. I want to know on a meta level what is so compelling for you. What is driving you? What is motivating you? Why, when the mainstream has sort of tinkered with the system, figured it out enough to their own satisfaction, and then just moved on to higher tech, so quote unquote higher technology, why doesn't that satisfy you? What's going on inside of you that feels compelled to go dig deeper? Why this question about getting it right, understanding how it works?
Yeah, well, it's literally an astronomical problem. So it's just a fun problem, but it's also meaningful to me because either these great masters are right, and you can have some faith and confidence in this philosophy, or if they can't be right about a simple motion of the cosmos, then I have to question everything. And I don't want to go to all the work of questioning everything. So let's just work on the one astronomical problem that they're wrong about. So that's.
So if I'm hearing it, it's an existential question then for you, because your paradigm, your view, your philosophy hinges on, if one thing over here feels tenuous, then perhaps the whole apparatus feels tenuous. So in order to shore up the wisdom of the ages, you have to keep digging. And
yes, and it's the only paradigm that makes sense to me, really. I've heard of all the other stories. I've studied history. It was a one subject in school that I always got an A in. I really cared less about most of the others. And I think we have our histories all wrong. So I keep finding more and more reasons over the years why this is important. If you've lost your place in history, that's like amnesia. If you have amnesia, this, you you not only don't remember the past, but you're freaked out about the future. You don't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been. And
There you
so
go. That's
it's critical to society, in my opinion.
I'm so glad that I stopped, because that's what I was looking for, and I don't think that hasn't. I imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, that it hasn't also come at a cost. I look at people like Graham Hancock and Robert Schock and many other people, John Anthony West, people that were compelled to go deeper and weren't content with the mainstream paradigm or worldview. Oftentimes, they really had to stick their neck out, and that means career wise, it means putting yourself potentially at risk, your stature, your credibility. Um, Anything like that happen to you? Was anything at risk? Did it ever feel tenuous? Did you ever come against this sort of wall where something deep inside of you was pushing you into a territory that may actually damage your reputation and put you in the fringe? Something like that?
Yes, but it's nothing critical. So yeah, the people you mentioned, Graham Hancock, Robert Schock, John Anthony West, they're all friends. And when we get together at events, I mean, John's not with us anymore, but we would all just, you know, compare the arrows we had in our back from people shooting at us. Those guys have been attacked much more than me because you know, their topics I think are easier to understand, and precession's kind of a subtle one. But I do talk to astronomers now and then and kind of get into this. And at first, astronomers will say, "Well, that can't be. I mean, Copernicus and Newton are wrong about this," and then, but if you actually go and show them the literature, oh, okay, I never realized that wasn't completely solved. Um, then they just will sort of quiet down and back off. And I don't try to make a ruckus either. I'm not looking for more arrows. I'm just trying to solve the problem. And there's a few little nitty gritty issues that we still need to work out.
I interrupted you when you were just about to segue into the binary, so please continue.
Right. Um, so if the sun really does move, so Copernicus is right on 2 out of 3. He's right about the Earth's rotation. He's right about the Earth's revolution, but he's wrong about uh, how much the Earth wobbles. And we've done some work and found some just bulletproof ways to prove that the Earth's axis really can't wobble more than about 2 arc seconds per year. And yet it's supposed to account for 50 arc seconds of the sun's motion. And what that means is at least 48 arc seconds of the sun's motion backward across the sky is real. The sun actually moves. And while this was blasphemous, immediately post Copernicus or post Newton, since Hubble, we kind of realized, oh yeah, stars move. Lots of stars are moving all over the place. And so, but it's just thought that, yes, but our only movement of our star is around the galactic center in 240 million years. Surely it's not going anywhere in just 24,000 years, or we would know it by now. That's what a lot of astronomers say. And then if you ask them, well, how would you know it? One of the things is, well, the sun would be moving. And so it's almost a catch-22. Yep. But the sun does move if we're wrong about precession. Oh yeah. Yeah, but nobody accepts that yet. And so that's a little bit of a conundrum right now, that a lot of people are not looking for what might be moving the sun, because it takes a really big mass to make the sun curve through space with that kind of arc every year. And the reason they're not looking is because we have this old incorrect theory of precession that the sun really doesn't move. It's all the Earth wobbling that makes it appear that the sun moves.
I've noticed this with Graham's work too. I mean, of course, I had to go to graduate school. We had to use a scientific method. The scientific method, in its nature, it should always be open-minded, always looking to test it itself, and and I feel that this is another place where scientism sort of becomes religious dogmatic, where the mainstream just sort of shuts down around institutional ideas and sort of throws away the key, if you will. And here it's just a little maneuvering to open up the conversation again, because it doesn't hold its weight or water to ultimate satisfaction. So it really does represent the scientific spirit to keep checking and to keep asking questions and to keep moving forward. So I guess
Yes.
this is where is it Bernard? Is that the alternative
Well,
star?
well, that's a extremely good candidate, right? Um, but first, on your point, I love the point because you're aware of it in your own industry. You know, I'm aware of it. Yes, from this precession thing, nobody kind of wants to go over old ground. Hey, most astronomers moved on to more exciting things. Plasma physics, black holes are all the
Dark
rage
matter.
right now. Dark matter, yeah, dark energy. You know, it's there has to be massive amounts of dark matter just to hold the stars in to our galaxy. They should all be flinging out, you know, but for some reason they don't. So either our laws of gravity are wrong, and they don't want to say that that's wrong. So they made up this stuff. There's all this dark matter everywhere. And at first they thought, well, once we get good enough telescopes, we're going to find it, because they just thought it was big dark worlds. And time goes by, well, there's no big dark stuff out there. And so they said, well, then it's got to be a whole bunch of little tiny stuff, neutrinos, stuff like this. And they've done lots of experiments. Well, there's just not enough of that stuff. And so they need it. They don't let it go because it would break everything. Um, so yeah, there's all these other exciting things going on. And of course, dark energy is even bigger, you know, at the rate that all the galaxies are spreading out from each other. It would take just huge force to make that happen. And they have no clue what that force is, why it's happening. So um, I do think, yeah, we need to do some rethinking here. And just as in your own industry, you're starting to embrace all these different ways of looking at the self, fixing the self or the ego or whatever. Um, and your industry is still pretty myopic, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of these people that sort of left the fold. I've just found it too confining and rigid. And if I were to really express myself and really follow my soul's yearning, it would mean going into pastures uncharted that would considered on best days skeptical. So for me, yes, I found a lot of limits to the psychological world. I feel we're moving, with the exception of the psychedelic revolution, I think we're moving closer and closer, deeper into the scientific reductionistic paradigm. Or, you know, the gold standard of cognitive neuroscience has meant that more and more clients are being reduced to the chemistry, and therefore the gold standard of treatment ends up being medicine. And so I think we're doing a huge disservice by doing that. I mean, I don't know what the latest results is for ADHD amongst our young people, but I don't think that that's medicating them is a route that's healthy or suitable for them to flourish. And so
But
I think there are movements for holistic therapies and integrative treatments, and certainly I'm a big advocate for trauma informed lenses. But the rise of spirituality in psychology is very, very new, and it's still sort of tenuous, and even there you get a lot of hokey pokey kind of stuff. So
right.
um, we're early days, I would say. I think in
Yeah.
that way I would agree with you.
Yes. Well, are you familiar with the characteristics of the four yugas according to, you know, Eastern,
I
mostly
am. And
Hindu?
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm nowhere near as well read as you are, but I did find Yukteswar's Holy Science early in my career too. And like I said, I did use it to inform some of the writing in Return with the Elixir. And, you know, I think those four cycles, four ages. I mean, my main interest was really to determine where the hell are we now and where are we going? That's what compelled me. Like, I wasn't
Right.
satisfied with today's maps. I'm just a human being. I'm looking around and I think things are absolutely chaotic. Things are falling apart. Polarization is off the charts. The ecological system seems to be balancing on a thread, and wars on theaters of war on multiple fronts. And I'm looking for a big picture explanation for this. And I'm not content with micromanaging it, one little bit at a time. I want the most complete and the biggest, widest angle lens of perspective. And that's what tipped me off when I was reading. I mean, I had read it earlier, much earlier on in my career, but I have a lot of devotion from a spiritual point of view, even if it's not my tradition. These great yogis, I had conviction in them, just like you. And so, I reread the Holy Science, and there I found an explanation to some of the symptoms that we're experiencing right now. And also, surprisingly, I found a lot of optimism too, because from a simplistic read, it does capture well where we are coming out of a dark age into the Renaissance, the rise of technology, but also this one quote that I like from Jung, which is at the current phase of where we are now, our technological prowess far exceeds our moral compass. And I think that that's a very good and succinct capture of the Dwarpa.
Exactly. Yes, yes. And Yogananda used to joke, he said, it is a difficult time because we're still very materially oriented, yet we're starting to wake up. So we use some of this material stuff in a incorrect way, cruel technology. But then he would laugh and say, but it only lasts 2,000 years and then we're through it. That by the year 4100 AD, telepathy and clairvoyance will once again be common knowledge. And that's a time where you can't get away with all this lying and deceit and, just cruelty that goes on in this very low age we're still in, when we can begin to be so empathetic that we can feel each other's being. We at that time you just things naturally get better, right? So that's what we're moving towards. I'm optimistic.
Yeah, we're on the upswing. We've come through the darker night, and now we're on the upswing. I think is a message that's worth repeating. And funnily enough, just as a side note, when you say telepathy, and I mean, people's eyebrows raise, and this is when we lose them, especially because we're overly reductionistic.
I knew you were going to say that.
But I understand that. I'm not, I understand that it seems so far-fetched, and then so it then gets shelved in a sort of mythology camp, as if, and mythology itself has such a bad reputation amongst left brain thinking people. So, but now that we have AI, now that our technology is growing so powerful, it's totally conceivable that even if you just consider the power of having a device in your pocket right now, how much as a human being, how much capability, power at the fingertips we have. And as AI and nanotechnology increase, I'm not suggesting this is what is meant by Treta and Satya Yuga in terms of, I mean, I understand that they're talking about natural capability, like my spiritual teachers, they're dialed in. They have uber capability, superhuman capabilities. But even just technologically based capabilities, the average human being is going to have capability that even 10, 15, 20 years ago we would have thought absolutely impossible. Right. Now that goes both ways. A sword cuts both ways. So this is where a strong moral compass, I think, really serves us, because we may have technological power and prowess, abilities to read minds, for example. But I mean, if that's used for a marketing ploy in order to sell you ads and and do the rest of it, then it's really not in the service of the development of the totality of this human species. So I think there, spirituality adds its 2 cents, that even if we can develop science to a great degree, we also need to develop our hearts.
Right. Yeah, we need that balance as we unfold. But that's just, I think, how it often goes in the Dwapara Yuga when we're developing more and more technology. That's how we first use our higher consciousness for outside practical things, material things. We're still very much in a material world. It'll come, it'll slowly, you'll just see more and more undercurrents of awakening going on. And even if it's faux awakening, wokeness for starters, at least
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
some conversation about it.
Yeah.
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 So let's close the loop on Bernard as a binary star partner. Would you call it a star partner? What's the actual
Yeah. So
term?
it turns out that most stars have partners, and the estimates are anywhere from 50% at the low end to 80%. We were just at Caltech the other night, and a gal gave a talk on binary systems and put it at 80%. I think that's because they're discovering more and more brown dwarfs, very difficult to see stars, and we're realizing many stars we thought were single are actually in companion relationships. So it appears that, stars like relationships as much or more than people do.
It's beautifully put.
Yeah, just, and so the question then is, okay, if our sun is curving through space, what is causing it to curve? And when we first started this work, nobody was looking for nothing. But about the year 2015, 14, 15, 16, a team at Caltech and others around the world began to find a lot of dwarf planets. These are like Pluto-sized planets. And that's why we had to change the nomenclature and go to large classical planets, of which there are now only 8. And we have about 7 dwarfs so far of Pluto-sized planets. And they began finding all these. And when they found, say, more than 4, 5, they realized, oh, they're all falling into a pattern. And that pattern is they tend to be inclined to the plane of the solar system. So the farther out you go with these smaller and smaller objects, they're not on the plane, they're inclined. And they all have their perihelions, their closest approach to the sun, on one side of the sun. It's not just scattered randomly, And so that's what made Mike Brown and Kim, I think it's Badajian at Caltech realize, oh, there's got to be some big mass out there. And so formally they started looking for Planet 9 about 2017 or so. And they figured they'd find it pretty quick. And, I always had the sneaky suspicion it's not a planet, it's actually a star, it's farther out. But we'll get around to that. At least other people are joining the search for something. And now I think they've searched maybe 30% of the sky, but there's areas that are really tough, like against the galactic center, stuff like that. And so they're continuing their search with better and better telescopes and computers and things like this, but they haven't found anything yet. And so I really believe that, if they could account for precession not being a mere wobbling of the earth, then they realize, oh, whatever this is, isn't just pulling your dwarf planets, it's pulling the whole solar system. And therefore it is bigger and it's probably farther out. And so, yeah, we put a little team together here at the Binary Research Institute, the mathematician, astrophysicist, and some guys that help do models and things. And we searched, and the natural place to look, first of all, would be like Alpha Centauri, our closest star system. It happens to be a triple star system. But it seems so far off plane that it's not going to cause the sun to go in the motion that we see it through the constellations of the zodiac. And so Bernard's looks like a better candidate. It's farthest away. It's our second closest stellar system. And at first it was just, it's a good possibility. And then more and more people began to talk about how weird Bernard's is acting. You know, it happens to be the fastest star in the sky. Mm. And if you talk to astronomers about this, why could Bernard's be moving so quickly? They'll say, well, it's so close, you know, closer objects will appear to move more quickly. You know, you can move your finger like this in front of your face slower than a jet going across the sky, yet the jet will still be there because it's so far away. The close thing seems to be moving faster relative to you. And so, but yet it's 1.5 times the distance of Alpha Centauri, yet it's moving 3 times the speed. So it's not just proximity alone that's causing Bernard's to seem to move so quickly. So I talked to some other astronomers who are looking at this, and they said, well, it must have come into a close encounter with another star sometime in the relatively near past 10, 20,000 years or something. And just like we use gravity assist or gravity boost to get satellites out there, we'll send them past Jupiter, past the moon, or past Saturn to get Voyager and Pioneer out there, things like that. So too would a star speed up if it went really close to another star. But it's actually accelerating, meaning if it went close to another star 10,000 years ago, it would have given it a boost, but then it would slowly be decelerating, even if it's the fastest star in the sky. And a recent paper shows it is still accelerating. And so where is Bernard's going? Well, every astronomer will tell you it's coming straight at us. So if it had a close encounter with another star, where is that other star? It should be in the local stellar neighborhood. And I think it's us. It's the sun. It's coming straight at us at a really high rate of speed.
So the coming straight out, to my layman's ears, is synonymous with this idea of being on an upswing. And what I mean by that is if it turns out that it's Bernard's, that the sun is in a binary system with, and that there's a kind of gravitational dance that draws them closer together and then spins them back out, like almost like an inhalation and exhalation.
Right.
When they're at the inhalation, we would call that the ascension, or the golden ages, when the two lovers are as close together as possible.
Yes.
And so if it's coming towards us,
periapsis,
would it be synonymous with this idea of us ascending?
Yes. So all stars get closer to all binary systems. They go closer and farther away, periapsis to apoapsis. If it involves the sun, perihelion to aphelion. And yes, it does seem that the cycle, according to, you know, some of these ancient Eastern Indian guys who talk about this, they say, yeah, when it was at its farthest point from us, we were at our darkest point, which was about 500 AD. And we wallowed there for a while and then had our Renaissance, you know, 1500 AD or so. And every great civilization had pretty much collapsed by 500 AD, you know, Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, the Indus Valley, Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, the great Olmec, Mayan civilizations, finally the Greek and the Roman civilization, last gasp. Things were still, new societies would build, but sort of always on a cruder scale, you know, more brutal. And then since the Renaissance, you know, I know some people are mad about the world nowadays, but really government's so much better. There were no human rights 600 years ago. Judgment was whatever the king said, or the guy in charge, who usually kept his authority just by brute force. Slavery was everywhere, and things have gotten a lot better. So it does seem to be that it syncs up. And so if it's roughly a 24,000 year cycle, which is, our current system of time is a microcosm of it, 24 hours, 12 hours AM going closer to the light, 12 hours PM farther from the light. It's a little microcosm of the great year. Then the last golden age would have been, 11,500 BC. And then the next one would be, 12,500 AD, pinnacle. But obviously things get better far, far before that.
11,500 BC isn't it a date that Graham uses often? Is at the end of the Younger Dryas? Yeah, end of the Younger Dryas?
It syncs with the Younger Dryas. I think the impact might have been around 11,600. So it's almost ironic that you might be in this high state of consciousness, and so you want more action on the world. So the world might actually be, closer to an ice age. You might be having more impacts. If there's a star coming close to our Oort cloud and things like this, more stuff is probably happening, which is cool.
That definitely holds true as an alchemical principle. I mean, it's sort of like the night is darkest before the light. It's sort of like that's where all the input, if you look at the impacts as sort of inputs that create fire, that's a great period of transition, transmutation, maybe. That's how I read that.
Yeah. And so, it does, just basic physics suggests that there's maybe a little more action between the two stars as they get closer together. There is a guy, he won the Nobel Prize in 1970, Hans Alfven. And he basically said that, stars communicate with each other, and they're sending these big plasma filaments back and forth. It's like something's happening on this mass scale and in an invisible spectrum. So we don't really see it. But if you look at the whole spectrum, beyond visible light, then all this stuff is happening. Yeah. Sort of going back to our conversation, these other worlds and dimensions and things going on that we're hardly even aware of right now.
So we're almost there in terms of making the jump to the application. So let's say that the hypothesis, if it's not Bernard's, it's another one, but it's in a binary system.
Yeah. So let me first give you a couple of cons too, because I don't want to pin myself too much right here. So the con with Bernard's right now is everyone says, oh yes, it will come close. It'll actually be our closest star, closer than any other star right now, but it's just going to zoom by us. And the reason for that is basic physics, according to the laws of gravity. And that is, it's moving beyond escape velocity. It wouldn't stay in orbit. And we know this locally. If a satellite's going too fast, it could go by the Earth trying to re-enter. And so that's the problem with Bernard's. And it's a big problem, but there's a lot of problems. The same thing we talked earlier about, all these stars seem to be hanging in there when they should be flinging out. So maybe Bernard's is going to act the same way, but we don't know what that mechanism is. And so there's this big question mark as to whether Bernard's could really be a companion star. Another one, possibility, but it has the con of looking like it's too far away right now, and that is Sirius. Because Sirius doesn't seem to precess. It's the brightest star in the sky. It's, the Egyptians and many other cultures just revered it as, having this relationship with Horus, the sun. And it's a really interesting star. But at 8.6 light years, it's hard to imagine how we get around a common center of mass with that star in 24,000 years versus the common center of mass with Bernard's will be less than 1 light year when it's at its closest point. So we can easily get around it in 24,000 years. Yeah. So those are the pros and cons of 2 possible candidates. And we'll just have some fun looking at other possibilities over the years.
Amazing. Thank you for synthesizing it. And so now, my real interest, and we've already sort of touched on it because it's it's obvious. It's like, so what? Well, how does it affect us? Let's assume just for a second in the scenario, in the thought experiment, that it is Bernard's. It's coming closer. It's heading right on the trajectory. It fits in terms of a 24,000 cycle, and it's on its way, and we're on an upswing. So now, what kind of actual tangible effect might it have? I think in your article here, you do a nice job pointing to the effect during the day versus the night, and the effect of the seasons as a kind of rough metaphor. Would you mind repeating that and giving us the broader view of the larger cycle on its impact on consciousness?
Sure. So we're very familiar with these small cycles. The Earth spins on its axis. We turn towards the sun. Everything wakes up. Photosynthesis occurs. Trillions of things get into action, including humans and animals and stuff. And then when we turn away from the electromagnetic spectrum of the sun, we all slow down, go into, most of us, 99.9% of us, a completely different state of consciousness, subconscious, where we think that world is real, and we're having our dreams and things like that. So just that first celestial cycle, the Earth spinning on its axis, causes these huge changes in consciousness. But it's so common, we don't think anything of it, right? Yeah, it's normal. And same thing with the seasons. The second celestial motion, Earth goes around the sun every 365 days. When you have more light, trillions of things just burst out of the ground and then bloom and give their fruit. And then the light begins to wane and things start to die and wither, again, by the trillions. And animals change their behaviors. They're flying south, or they're hibernating, or they're going on mass migrations, or whatever it is. And so everything changes, including, humans in our own little way. We might do different sports or work on different activities, or, just have different patterns in seasons, but we're more immune to them because we have more technology. We can buck natural forces, right? And so, yeah, I think those are 2 good analogies for how this larger cycle might work. But it's probably much more complicated, at least beyond my ability to completely understand. And even the great ones that write about this topic say that, yeah, there's some effect there. We go around this other star, but it actually brings us to a closer point in space and a farther point in space, something they call the seat of Brahma, or Vishnu Nabi. And that is, that's what's really having the effect. So I'm not going to get into that this lifetime. Maybe I'll come back to that.
So I guess the idea that we're in the Dwapara, maybe you can give a little bit of the constellations or characteristics of the 4 ages, and focus in on where we are right now. So sort of we can tie those symptoms or the presenting sort of constellation of qualities. The signature, sometimes I would call it too, the signature of the ages is evident.
Yeah. And I think it's really helpful to understand them, to understand where we are in time and space. So the Indians call them the Kali Yuga, the lowest one, the Dwapara Yuga, which we're in now, then the Treta Yuga, when telepathy and clairvoyance are common knowledge once again, and then finally the Golden Age, or the Satya Yuga, the Indians call it, which we can hardly understand. But the Greek terms are probably easier to relate to, and they just call it the Iron, Bronze, Silver, and Golden Age. And in the Iron Age, that's the lowest age, the Kali Yuga for the Indians. And they say that mankind can only perceive through the 5 senses: his his empathy, telepathy, clairvoyant capabilities completely shut. And so it's a very material world that mankind perceives. And so he might still have some remembrance of higher knowledge, but it would just all become superstitious and mythical and godlike parlance for these things by that time. And yeah, the Greeks call it the age of man. And then the next one, the Bronze Age, is the Greeks call the age of the hero. So we're starting to wake up. We have a lot more capability. We can move around not only our area but the planet much faster, and we're aware of more stuff. And so there's a lot of dramatic situations that we can get into. And so, yeah, it's the age of hero, and the whole world's just waking up. And at first, all you see is all the problems.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when the light just comes out, the shadows are really long, right?
That's so beautiful and poignant right there. Yeah. Is the emergence of the shadow, what's right delicately behind the veil.
Yes. And so we're the age of the hero right now. And then we'll go through this 2,400 years roughly. And then the age of the Silver Age, which is telepathy, clairvoyance, and the Greeks call it the age of the demigods. So, Jesus, he's speaking from this golden age consciousness, telling us, ye are gods, these things I do, ye shall do also, and greater things. And, he's really encouraging us on. But long before we're there in any mass capacity, we go through the hero and demigod stage. And of course, Hollywood paints demigods in a very material way, because that's the language we use now. That it's when a god marries a human, you get a demigod. But it's really, when a human is halfway awake or a little bit more, and he starts to realize that, wow, I can do anything. Nothing can affect me, on a spiritual level. And so, yeah, imagine a world with that kind of consciousness. That's the Silver Age. And then the Golden Age, it's, they say the cup can't hold the ocean, so our consciousness now trying to conceive the Silver Age or Golden Age is,
Unfathomable.
Yeah, unfathomable. We have these little metaphors when a great tech like AI comes along, but that's about all we can do right now. But yeah, I can only imagine how beautiful it is. And even archaeological evidence, it's mostly mankind living in tune with nature. So, you're not going to find big, hard stuff that we build in lower ages for the most part. But we sure find some wisdom from them, that dates back through these great ones. They seem to always be quoting the very ancients. Yeah, when Jesus said, ye are gods, he says, is it not written that ye are gods? It was all known at one time. We're just in the process of rediscovering. So that's a very rough summation of the age of man, age of the hero, age of the demigod, and age of the gods. And our entire mindset changes. And so right now we're very material, just barely into the age of the hero. And we need to talk about things in a material way to have this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And so we use technology to do it. And but I'm sure this conversation will be much different a few thousand years from now.
Just a small note on the time periods, the great year versus the Vedic model. It seems to me the Yuga models use a ratio. And does the great year, the Hellenistic or the Greek version, also have designate the same time periods for each of the ages, or are they equally measured, or are they on a ratio also?
I don't think there's any surviving records that talk about the ages as a ratio. And even as we go through the Dark Age, these ages have been appropriated by historians to say, well, the Iron Age is when they invented iron. It doesn't explain the Silver Age or Golden Age very well, or Hero Age, but we kind of change these terms over time. So a lot has been lost. But if you read again Hesiod or Homer makes reference to some of these higher times too. It's just supposed to be unbelievably beautiful.
I noticed that you gave a duration of 2,000, around roughly 2,000 years per, or I mean,
Per
how
zodiac sign. So
so for the zodiac sign, so for entering into Aquarius, for example, we're on the cusp between the Piscean and the Aquarian. So the Aquarian age, roughly speaking, is going to last 2,150 years, and that makes the full rotation of 24,000 years around, something like that, right?
right. So it gets a little technical, but according to Kepler's laws, bodies that go around other bodies, when they're closest, they're moving fastest. And when they're farthest away, least gravitational pull, they're moving the slowest. And so the precession rate, just in the period of time when we have really good records, the last 200 years, has moved roughly from 50.0 arc seconds per year to 50.1 arc seconds per year to 50.2 arc seconds per year to 50.4 arc seconds per year. So for some reason, the sun is speeding up. Is gravity getting stronger? No, I don't think the moon and sun are getting in closer. So there's another reason the sun's speeding up, and it's probably because it's getting closer to its companion star, and they're both going to continue to speed up. That's probably why we see Bernard's accelerating if Bernard's is the companion. And so I think the rate will average 50 arc seconds per year. So if you just take the number of arc seconds in a circle, 1,296,000, and divide it by 54 arc seconds per year, the average that the sun goes across the sky, you get 24,000 years. But if you say, well, what is the precession rate now in terms of numbers of years it takes to complete a cycle? Well, then you divide the number of arc seconds in a circle by 50.4, and you get, it's going to take 25,720 years roughly at the current rate. But it's accelerating, and everyone acknowledges that. So I think the ancients are right when they use the 24,000 approximation.
If I'm looking at it like a Swiss clock with multiple dials within dials within dials, so you have the day, and then you have the year, and then you have the astrological age, and that fits neatly into the larger great year, correct?
Yeah. So they say the astrological age is, where the sun is.
This is a question that I had from the book when I was doing this. I never quite definitively, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to articulate this, so bear with me. But
well, I'm not an astrologer, so I'll be equally as poor on my answer.
Does it follow that the astrological ages are always in line with the same descent and ascent of the yugas? Are certain astrological ages always in Satya?
For all extents and purposes, I believe it is. There might be an even bigger cycle going around much more distant points, including around the center of the galaxy. And so it might slightly move it over millions of years. But right now, it seems that most all the zodiacs you look at, all the good ancient ones, they'll put Aries on the top. And I saw it in your book, actually. You have a zodiac as one of your early pictures there. And Aries is at the top. Think about Homer's story. I think it's in the Iliad. It's the Argonauts.
Yeah.
And they're in pursuit of the holy, or the golden fleece, right? Jason and the Argonauts. And so what is the golden fleece? The fleece is what a ram wears. Sheep wears it's it's Aries. Aries marks the golden, the very pinnacle of the highest age. And so Jason and the Argonauts are pursuing that which is worn in the golden age. They want that golden age consciousness. That's
Yes.
the real adventure
Yes.
journey they're on. We're all on, right? The hero's journey. And so, yeah, that to me, because there's a lot of different zodiacs, but the preponderance of the ancient ones, you will find Aries at the top.
Yeah.
And then you can start to relate to all the little stories, Scorpio and Virgo and stuff like that, and start to make sort of intuitive sense of what the zodiac means in my mind. I haven't read your book yet, so I can hardly wait to get to that, to get your take on it all.
So that, I mean, if you say at 12 o'clock is Aries, then it follows that the Piscean somewhere down in the Kali area, and that's where we have this kind of watershed moment between Piscean and Aquarian, which we find ourselves, and also between Kali and Dwapara, something like that.
Right. So there's 2 hour hands. They're the equinoxes, and the great ones use the autumnal equinox as the hour hand of the ages. So when the autumnal equinox, which is now not even in Leo, it's very near the bottom, because we're near the darkest age right now. When the autumnal equinox gets up, it slays Taurus to get into Aries. That's how many thousands of years from now, 10,000 years from now or something. And then Pisces is actually next, but we're the lowest age, so we've completely reversed things. What people use now is the spring equinox, and they say, oh, well, the spring equinox is in Pisces, about to go into Aquarius. But the spring equinox says we're in the golden age. So spring equinox is obviously the wrong hour hand of the ages. You got to use the right hour hand to understand how the clock works, right? Yeah.
That was very helpful. I don't know if anyone will relate to it, but it's just sort of, it was persnickety with me in my design of some of these and thoughts of some of these.
Yeah. Before we leave too, I hope you can tell me a little bit of your take on mandalas and their meaning and higher work, because I think it's a higher age technology.
Well, I'd love to. I mean, just it may be a good way to wrap up our conversation for now, because I very much enjoyed it, and I hope that we can continue it and treat it as a long conversation over time. I mentioned before we started the Great Borobudur Mandala in Java, 9th century, three-dimensional mandala that rises out of, situated in the plains there, with flanked by 2 volcanoes. It's a Buddhist mandala, which is essentially it's a deity's palace. It's a 3-dimensional palace of a deity. And the interesting fact about the Borobudur mandala, it's definitely, to my eyes, astrologically aligned. So it's both a timepiece, a timekeeper, a monolithic structure that, I mean, for example, if I throw out the number, there happens to be 72 Buddhas at the very top of it. And of course, you're smiling because you're sensitive to that number from an astrological point of view. There's also 52 Buddhas at the lower realm. There are 3 dimensions. These 3 dimensions represent the tree lokas, what they call the tree lokas, which share in common between Indian and Buddhist thought, the dimensions of consciousness as it rises. Basically, the mandala there serves multi-purposes. It's one, a timekeeper, because it's astrologically aligned.
And what is the orientation relative to the Earth coordinates, north, south, east, west?
That I'm not sure I can answer. I won't say, because I can't.
I'll look it up. Yeah.
It serves multi-purposes. It's an astrological device for sure, but it's also a ritual. I mean, of course, these were shared multiple usage, just as the Mayan temples did, and the Egyptian temples. They're initiatory sites. So the thing about the Borobudur mandala is it's covered with over 2,500 reliefs, and the reliefs are the pictorial wisdom of the Buddhist canon. And so as you make your way up 3 levels, you're also circumambulating. And as you make your way around the circumambulation, you're gaining wisdom through pictures. And so I've heard one scholar describe the Borobudur as a film, because film is showing you clip by clip as it moves past light. In this case, the aspirant is walking around and gaining knowledge as they ascend towards the apex. So it was a place of religious ascension, and probably some sort of form. The mandala is a reenactment of embodying the body and mind of a deity. So just like you mentioned the Christian notion of becoming Christ consciousness, they would say that the ritual reenactment of this circumambulation to rise to the center of the mandala is to assume the Buddha mind, just to become awakened oneself.
I love it.
And to be perfectly aligned cosmos and psyche. So one thing about the mandala is that it is a crucible in which an integration happens between opposing forces, light and dark, higher, lower, heaven, earth, these kinds of phenomenons. It's a way of integrating them. It's a place for integration. And so primarily in the Buddhist tradition, these are considered masculine and feminine qualities. So the wisdom wing and the compassion wing, or you might be familiar with sort of transcendence and embodiment. So embodiment, living in the world through compassion, and yet not being of the world in terms of its material dimension. So
when you visited this site, you said it's in Indonesia. Did you feel good during this process?
I won't give too much away, but as I write in the book, I mean, one of the thrusts of the book is a personal narrative. I started having visions about 3 years ago about this mandala. I was sort of being pulled in by the mandala. And I started having visions of my teacher having a ritual atop of the mandala, and he wasn't alone. In my vision, he was in collaboration with another wisdom keeper of another tradition. So I saw an archetype of cross-cultural interdisciplinary ritual happening at the apex of this mandala. And without giving too much away, we actually inhabited, we rehearsed it. I actually found, by way of synchronicity, the other compatriot, the counterpart to my teacher, who was a Shaiva master. So I was reuniting Buddhism and Shaivism atop the mandala. And lo and behold, 500 years ago, when this, when this mandala was in use, it was in use by people who had already combined these two traditions. It was actually one syncretic tradition called Shaiva Buddha. And over time, it was lost. And so I'm out of the sheer, well, yes, and out of the sheer universal or collective unconscious, I don't take any special credit for this. I was just a part of this, theater. But out of the collective unconscious, it became apparent to me that these two traditions should join again. And so our teacher and this great tantric master of the Shaiva tradition performed this ceremony for the first time in 500 years atop the Borobudur. And there's a part I won't talk about just now, because there was even more significance to that had to do with a symbolic crown, which is missing on top of the chatra. It's called a chatra. It's like an umbrella or crown that sits on top, the very pinnacle of it, which has been lost for 500 years. In other words, it's broken. So there's a documentary series that I was involved with it's called The Missing Piece, which chronicles our adventure to pull off this ceremony and do a pilgrimage there and do a ceremony around restoring this chatra. Well, stay tuned, because there's some very real-time news that's coming out as a result of this reunification.
Is the documentary out yet? Or
the documentary is out. It's on YouTube. It's completely free. I'm encouraging people to watch it, if for nothing else. And I'm sure we can end probably on this note. You and your colleagues, Graham, and all the other great speakers that you have at your conference, I think we're all in agreement that the doors are opening, the veils are thinning, that we are awakening from amnesia, as Graham likes to talk about, that we're waking up and that we're rediscovering. And there's a lot of rediscovering and rebirthing, reevaluating, returning. We are finding our way back to something much older. And this couldn't be more true in the archaeological domain, as
Yes.
lidar is
Right.
creating avenues for rediscovery of even more ancient civilizations. We're also rediscovering the ancient technology and wisdom that underlied them. And so this is what my book Return with the Elixir is really about, that each of us is situated in this dance. It's not just for archaeologists and experts like you. Every one of us has an opportunity now, as the ages are transitioning, to access this salient quality within us that is far more empathic, far more connected, far more sovereign, an agent, a hero, so that we can actually make a contribution, and not to be pulled in or sucked into the fear channel, but to always have that hope and always to have that confidence that we can make in our own sphere of influence some contribution.
I love it.
Well, you have the last word. Please, you just riff on that, or close
Well,
up with
if I was going to riff on that, I would say that it seems like this whole show is being made just for me, and I get to have a starring role in it. But that's way too big a thought. I think it's the thought we should all have. It's all just a great show for each of us, isn't it?
Walter, thank you so much for your time and your contribution to the field, sticking your neck out, trusting your intuition, forging ahead into the fray, into the vanguard, into the unknown, keeping your North Star line, bringing us back the boon, the elixir of this vital information that connects us with the wisdom of the ages. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I just wanted to plug CPAC real quick.
Please do. Yes.
Anybody that
CPAC
happens
is
to
awesome, by the way. I mean, I just think you've been doing it for 13, 14 years now. Where are we?
So this one will be October 18th and 19th at Ananda Village up in Northern California. We'll have Robert Schock as one of our speakers.
Freddie Silva will be there. He's been on our show. He's amazing.
Bunch of just great guys and gals. And our theme is the consciousness of the higher ages. We're trying to describe it from all these different perspectives to better understand it. So you can find out information just by going to CPAK Online, cpaconline.com.
Yeah, and I'll make sure I have all of the vital links in the description on the YouTube channel. Great. I look forward to further conversations with you. Enjoy the Elixir book, among many others who are requesting your endorsement. Thank you for your time, and all best wishes.
All right, man. Talk soon.
Thank you for listening to the Wisdom Keeper podcast. If you've enjoyed this presentation of sacred knowledge, kindly like, subscribe, review, and share our podcast and video series on YouTube with your network, so that more people can benefit from these teachings, and together we can create a brighter future. If you're interested in my online courses, our community membership, and pilgrimages I lead, consider visiting the Contemplative Studies program at gradualpath.com. Until we gather again, all best wishes.